Okay, so what exactly is an in-place upgrade? Well, the key thing with an in-place upgrade, I guess I should also point out before we go too far, if you're one of those people that comes along and only listens to part and then drops off, make sure if you listen to us talking about in-place upgrades, you don't run off thinking this is necessarily a good thing to do. Stick around and make sure you listen to the alternative in the next section. But an in-place upgrade, I generally don't recommend this, but what you're doing is you're basically taking an existing version of SQL Server or a server that's running SQL Server, you're popping in the updated install media for the newer version, and you're running it, and boom, your SQL Server is upgraded and now running on a newer version of SQL Server. If you get lucky. I say it that way, if you get lucky, because there's a lot of cases in doing this where if anything goes wrong, something could fail along the way and you're stuck without that SQL Server. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons around this. Mitch?
So some of the pros, I mean, it's just simpler because you're not building out that new server. And I'm kind of jumping over into what the build and migration version is, but you're not building out a new server, so it's a bit easier to just handle one machine, and it's a bit faster because you're not having to migrate everything over at the same time. You're also looking at the lower hardware cost building out the new server. It's going to cost more money, especially if you're doing it like on Azure. You're running two machines concurrently. You're just going to increase costs there inevitably. And then shorter overall project timeline in the small setups. It's just quicker to execute, less things to test, less things to set up, but it doesn't always mean that that's the better option.
Yep. So an example on that shorter timeline, I mean, there's servers that I've worked on that have been my own test servers that I know worst case scenario, if something goes bad, I'm just going to rebuild the whole server from scratch. I'm not that worried about it. Where if I want to go, I've gone from different versions of SQL Server to 2 to 5 years newer versions. I've just popped in this install media, ran it, and upgraded it, and all was good. 20 to 30 minutes later, the whole project is complete. However, that's risky. And let's jump into some of the cons and risks. So, one of the reasons I see is that it's a higher risk is that you're really destroying, not destroying, let me rephrase that. You're modifying a production server that if something goes wrong, you don't necessarily have a good way to roll it back. Now, if you're going through and doing that upgrade and something happens halfway through and one of your data files is destroyed, that's not very common, but it could happen. How are you going to get it back? Now, one of the ways to mitigate that risk is if you're running on a virtual machine to do a complete virtual machine snapshot. And pretty much anytime I'm going to do an in-place upgrade, I want to make certain that I've got a virtual machine snapshot that I can roll back to. Other risks? What any you can think of there, Mitch?
Well, I think going off what you said, you need to have those rollback methods, but you can't always test those rollback methods before you commit to doing the upgrade. Especially if you're doing like a production server, you can't say, okay, we took a snapshot today, we're going to do the upgrade, and then if it all goes wrong, we're going to roll back. You can't just try the rollback prior to the upgrade, or it's not always an option to even try that.
Yeah, there was one I did an in-place like that where the administrator of the virtual machine, the VM administrator basically said, yeah, we got a good snapshot. Anything goes wrong, we can roll it back. And something went wrong. I figured, okay, no problem. We need to roll it back. And he rolled it back, and it turned out that after rolling back, that he had taken the snapshot like 12 hours before the upgrade, and 12 hours of data would have been lost. 12 hours of production data, including financial transactions, would have been lost had we used that. So then what we had to do after he rolled it back, we had to switch back to the original failed upgrade version and then go through and actually fix it. And that took a number of hours to get it before it was actually running again. So rollback is absolutely painful in those situations. Or it can be. I mean, if you practice it and you know you've got a good VM rollback, well, there you go. Another disadvantage that I can think of, or a con with it, is you're stuck on the current hardware or operating system unless you do a separate upgrade there. And I don't like to do an OS upgrade and a SQL Server upgrade on the same day in the same downtime window. You might be a little bit more wild and crazy than I am if you want to try that. But the problem is if you do an OS upgrade and you do a SQL Server upgrade on the same system in the same day, you might find out that there is something horribly wrong after the process, and you may not be able to pin down whether it was caused by the OS upgrade or caused by the SQL Server upgrade. So I usually like to, if we're going to do an OS upgrade, to do that at a different time, for in place at least, so that we do the OS upgrade like 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, and then do the SQL upgrade so that you know if something did go wrong, which half of it is causing that problem. So, okay, so when would you want to choose an in-place upgrade versus looking at other options?
Truthful option, never. But in a perfect world, I mean, a perfect world is never, but in a real world situation, I would go with, if you're running a small environment, especially a small testing environment, that's the perfect opportunity to do it. I would say never do it with a production server, but in the inevitable, you need to have that checklist. You need to have rollbacks. You need to know that your rollbacks are good. You need to have backups. You need to have all these things set out in place before you just jump in, say, hey, I have my install media, let's do it.
And I guess one other thing we should point out too is that if we're just talking about a service pack or a cumulative update, I'm usually fine doing those on a server, an in-place upgrade on those, because that's, I mean, those are minor version bumps. We test them in lots of environments. We do probably hundreds of those, and very rarely do those have a problem. That's a whole different scenario. But what we're talking about here is when we're going from a full major version of SQL Server 2019 to 2022 or 2025 or one of those. So I guess the other one too is if you're on a tight budget and a tight timeline where you just can't afford the time to build out a new server and take the time to do it right, and you're willing to take that risk, you might get away with it. Now, the problem is when you try and go that way, you may end up some of the time taking far more time and far larger budget to get your system running again too.
I think from update or upgrade, whichever one you're doing, the most important thing is backup, backup, backup. Always have backups and double check backups.
Another thing to think about, whether you're doing a in-place or a migration build, is always run the upgrade advisor or the database migration assistant. I think the name's changed recently, in order to be able to go and analyze and make sure that whatever's in your database as you're doing it, that you don't have any deprecated features that are going away in the next version. Or if you're working in dev or staging, to make sure you test it there first before doing it on production. Okay, so that's kind of the in-place upgrade option, and usually we really don't recommend this, and I would rather spend the time to do it right than to do an in-place upgrade. And you know, some people hear that and they say, oh, well, you'd rather spend the time. Well, that's just billable hours. You just want to make more money at it. Well, even when we're working with our managed service customers who are on a fixed monthly price, that it doesn't matter whether we do it fast or whether it takes 3 weeks to get it done, we still make the same amount of money in that case. We still always try and stay away from the in-place upgrade, because even though it is the absolute fastest way usually to do things, it's not the most reliable, and it can lead to a lot of headaches. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like it, please click the thumbs up icon. And if you want to subscribe, click subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we have new videos. All right, have a great day.